Hello and welcome to Wine Blast. I'm Susie Barry and I'm here as ever with my husband and fellow master of wine, Peter Richards. And this is a special moment because this is the finale, the climax of season 2.
Summer is coming.
Well, I won't go that far. It might be a climax of season 2. I'm not sure summer's coming.
No, but the point is it's time for us all to have a break.
Indeed. We all need a break.
Not that anyone will be having much of a break this summer.
I don't know. We might. We may not have holidays abroad, but we might have a bit of a break.
We have to rethink breaks.
Staycations.
Yeah, with wine.
Yeah.
There we go.
Wine will get us through it.
You know, plus this is not so much a goodbye as an au revoir because we will be storming back, after the summer, won't we?
There's a promise.
Some brilliant new episodes, including revisiting Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be picking up on our big English wine adventure again, and lots of other really fun and intriguing things, which we can't quite talk about just yet because they're under wraps.
We haven't decided, is what you're trying to say.
No,
honestly.
That's not it. Move on.
Anyway, in the meantime, there is a pretty healthy back catalogue for everyone to catch up on if there are any episodes that you happen to have missed. What have we featured? Burgundy to Bordeaux, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Sam Neill, what a mix, sweet chili crisps, I seem to remember coming into one episode. Dry drinking was an interesting one. Wine intolerances, I loved that one.
Yeah,
and actually there were some homemade sausage rolls, were there not?
I'm glad you picked up on the homemade sausage rolls.
Are you hoping for some more?
I am. That was my way of saying, can we have some more homemade sausage rolls?
When are we getting more?
Because I am addicted to those things. Seriously. Too good. Now, do you know how many episodes we're up to now?
I don't, but Mr. Facts and Figures, I'm sure you're going to tell me.
51.
51.
A half century of wine-soaked chat.
Almost your age. Not quite.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'm going to come off that and say, can I get away with a shameless plug? At this
I'm
point?
Sure you can, and you will.
Okay.
Do
I try
it quickly.
to get at least one in. Voting and nominations for the 16th annual People's Choice Podcast Awards are now live.
Who knew?
But not for much longer. I know. Well, we are in the running in the arts category, and it would be amazing if you are lovely, lovely listeners who are way too busy for this kind of nonsense, but you're also very, very, very kind and generous. If you could vote for us, we may get wine on the podcasting map.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Richards.
No, we have got lovely listeners.
So let's tell everybody what they have to do.
Okay, so head over to podcastawards.com. It says click here to vote on the homepage. You do have to register, but they delete your details after voting is over. It's all confidential. They don't share your info. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long to do. And in the drop-down menu for the arts category, you'll see Wine Blast. And of course, you can
vote from your mum.
Well, yes, no, I'd like to think that everyone would follow Mum's lead on this one. So, Mum, if you're listening, no excuses. Or maybe everyone else can show Mum what to do because she'll probably be the last one to do it, frankly. You can vote. So, Mum, you can vote in a whole load of other categories as well, if you want to, which is fun. But you have to do it by the end of July because that's when the deadline is. And if you're listening after this, you missed it. Sorry. No worries, but you missed it.
All gone. And we probably didn't win, but there you go. Never mind.
Worth a shot.
Anyway, so if we're asking people to give us their time, I think to do that, we probably shouldn't waste their time now.
Yep.
So let's crack on. There is one last thing to mention, though, and it's our big English wine adventure competition, which is to find a name and a charity for our amazing Hampshire sparkling wines.
Yeah, I think that was, when was it? Series 2, episode 13, I think it was. We talked about that, wasn't it?
Well remembered, heavens.
Yep.
And we're going to be announcing the winner when we finally get around to deciding on social media. So keep an eye out for that. And we're going to follow up with some more information about that and with the winner, etc., in one of our first episodes back in season 3. It's taking us a while to get there, but that's because we want to get it right, don't we? And we've had so many brilliant entries,
we have.
both for the name and the charity.
Yeah, we have. It's true, but people might read between the lines and think we can't actually agree.
No.
What would you say to that? What was your response?
I disagree.
You disagree?
I
Sounds
disagree.
like a politician's response.
I disagree that we can't agree.
You disagree that we can't... Right, whatever.
Oh.
Let's go back to the matter at hand, which is becoming a master of wine, the concluding part. Part of the reason we tackled this topic in the first place was an email from Michael Bregenza in Austria, who was just about to embark on his sommelier exams and wanted to know about our journey or our take on our journey to becoming Masters of Wine, or MWs for short. Now, Michael has been back in touch after hearing the first episode to say the following. He said, hello, Susie and Peter. I just listened to your latest episode, Becoming a Master of Wine. I was so excited when you read out my email. Thank you so much for dedicating your time to this topic. It was so interesting and educational to hear about your journey to becoming MWs, especially Susie's experience in Rust was fun to hear.
It wasn't fun to go through, Michael, I can tell you.
There we go. Is that an example of Schadenfreude?
Oh, no. I think Michael's being nice.
Okay,
I'm so pleased I made somebody brought a smile to somebody's
Rust
face.
Is served as a
certainly
positive
did bring
experience.
a smile to mine.
Everyone can laugh at you. And by the way, Michael continues, my sommelier exam went great. Cheers. Well done, Michael. Can't wait for part 2. P.S. The pronunciation of my name was spot on. I think that was you.
That was me, wasn't it?
Well
yes,
done.
thanks, Michael. It's rare that I get a pronunciation right. Anyway, in return, here is part 2. So, yes, in our first episode, we gave, didn't we, our take, a personal and professional on tackling the MW. And we also got the establishment views from the Institute of Masters of Wine, or the IMW. So in this episode, we're going to flip things around and we're going to get other people's views. And we have quite a few fascinating ones to share. We have a prospective student, we've got a current student, 2 of the most recently crowned MWs, and they've got some really good tips to share. And, drum roll, scary music, the chief examiner for the tasting exam.
With that drummer, I think everyone get a sense of how flimsy our table is that we record on. But, fair enough. So the idea is to get some short, sharp blasts from each perspective to hopefully, I don't know, paint as comprehensive a picture of this whole thing as possible. Which, and I think it's fair to say it may raise questions as well as provide answers. We've had quite a bit of feedback, haven't we, after the first episode on both fronts, which we
probably expect no less from prospective IMW
exactly.
students.
Well, it's not just that, though. It's from people who don't know anything about the exam, who actually aren't in wine, but they're just... So I think it's healthy and positive. Thank you. Keep the feedback coming in. We're very happy to answer questions.
Absolutely.
And whatnot.
Anyway, we're going to start at the top of the tree with Peter Marks, MW, the chair of the MW practical or tasting exam. So Peter helps select the wines for the tasting paper, and then he oversees all the examiners marking the tasting exam. I would say, in short, an IMW VIP, isn't he?
That's a lot of acronyms.
I mean, he's probably the one examiner whose mind the students would most want to tap into if they could.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
So Peter's based in the Napa Valley in California.
Lucky him.
Yeah, can't be bad, can it? It was a beautiful day when I spoke to him as well. Anyway, our connection wasn't great on this call, I have to say, so please bear with the sound quality. But I began by asking him what he wants to see from his students.
My 3 main items that I look for: 1 is good tasting ability, being able to not only describe wines accurately, but also with a good detailed analysis. So some people can identify a wine, but don't always give enough details behind why they found that to be a particular example of, Saint-Emilion or Grand Reserva Rioja, for example. So first thing is having really good tasting ability. Secondly, they need to have excellent logic and deductive reasoning. So it's often said that the tasting exam is it's a theory exam with a tasting. So they might have the tasting ability, but they need to have the theory knowledge to be able to prove their answer. And so what happens is they use their evidence that they have from their good tasting ability, and then they use good deductive reasoning and logic to prove their answers. And that requires a really good theory knowledge, so they consider the different options. And as many students know, at least I hope they know, they can earn some valuable marks, even if they're incorrect in their final conclusion, as long as their logic is sound and they're using correct evidence from the glass. The other thing we like to say is that when you do your practical exam, it's a little bit like 2 skills. One is to taste like a detective. Again, that's the tasting ability, and then prove like a lawyer. So having that ability to justify your answer. So besides tasting ability, good logic and deductive reasoning, the third is the confidence. And I think confidence is a subtle thing that comes through oftentimes when the best students, you can really see they just put their answers down with authority, and they feel very confident in what they're saying. And a good example is one might write as an answer, considering different options, they might say, and such suggest, and give, a couple options, as opposed to somebody else who's less confident and might say such and such could be. It's a very slight change in the words, but it has a huge impression on the reader when they read that answer. And I think another example of confidence is one might be answering a question such as maturity. Maturity really is two aspects. One is how old is the wine, and secondly, when is the wine best to be consumed. And if the student reads that answer, they don't necessarily have to give a vintage, for how old it is. They could say it's 1 to 2 years old, or it's 7 to 8 years old. But if they have the confidence to put a vintage down, that shows a lot of authority and confidence in that student and who does that. So those are the things I look for most importantly.
What would you say is the biggest challenge to passing this exam?
I think it's having that experience and having the ability to have tasted widely throughout the world, understanding different styles, understanding, again, the theory knowledge. One of the great things about this exam that is different from other blind tastings is that it really does consider not just identifying things, but you need to understand winemaking techniques. You need to be able to discuss quality. You need to be able to comment on commercial potential. Those are things that are so relevant to anybody working in the wine industry today. And those skills are tested. Again, it's a theory exam with a tasting.
So as an examiner, you don't seem very scary, but I think, all exams are a little bit scary. What is your biggest bugbear? What annoys you most that students do that they don't get right?
I would say the biggest thing is, and it's not as much of an issue anymore, but is handwriting. When you're looking at hundreds of exams and you're trying to get through them and do justice to the student, if you can't read what they're putting on the paper, it's really hard. That said, a lot of students nowadays do type. Sometimes we notice students who use computers tend to write a little bit too much. And that's here leading to another issue is time management. Sometimes they're writing so much because they can type very quickly, but then they don't leave time for other sections of the paper. Another thing is obviously, we call them the traditional howlers. I think when people make obvious mistakes, it's understood that sometimes just because of your nerves, you might make a silly mistake. But if they're consistent throughout a paper or a few papers, then you really begin to doubt the ability of the student. In recent times, I remember reading a student's note about vintage port and the production of vintage port, and it was aged in new oak. I don't think so. Or, the difference, people confusing Jura and Jurançon, for example. That was in the last paper we had in 2019. People didn't quite understand those were different wines from different regions.
That's difficult, isn't it? And if you had one top tip for students right now, what would it be?
I would be, if I was studying right now, obviously do as much blind tasting under time conditions as you can. And if you're in a tasting group or if you're working with a mentor and you miss it, carefully look back and say why. Don't try to defend yourself, but be honest with yourself and understand where you went wrong, and then work on those weaker skills that you might have. For me, it was always mixing up Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling because they all have high acid, and depending on the climate, they can have some similar characteristics. So I worked very closely and arduously to make sure that I was able to find my markers for those wines. So I think just practicing and being honest when you do make a mistake and go back and research why that's the case.
And just as a final point, the exam is obviously hugely stressful for the students, but I imagine it's pretty stressful for the examiners too. What do you do to unwind, Peter, when your duties are done as an MW examiner?
Well, the same thing I did when I was preparing for the exam. I believe there's a lot of mental preparation that needs to be done as well. For me, I meditate every day. I also try to get outside and bike ride here in the beautiful Napa Valley, which is a great time of year to do that. And when I'm out there, it's just, breathing that fresh air and it's also a time you can think and contemplate other things. And thoughts seem to be come more clearly when you're in that space. And I think that's a good thing to do if you're a student as well.
Peter, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Susie.
Some brilliant tips there. And not just about meditating in fresh air, which by the way, I think is a lovely idea. I'd love to be able to do that. But also the theory knowledge that you need for the tasting exam, and also the importance of confidence, of sounding plausible and authoritative.
Yeah.
Really interesting, the examples he gave about that.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing it, it was plausible and authoritative without sounding arrogant. It's a really fine line to
but also, but the fact he gave some actually very specific examples.
Yes.
People, it's easy to say that in theory, but actually he gave
get
the
specific
Then
examples.
you get a sense for what he means by that.
Absolutely. And maybe I love the bit. I mean, maybe buying a good pen to write with. It's hard, the
underrated.
writing. It's there's a lot of writing, and even if you're on a computer, then not overwriting. All really good advice, probably for life in general, but certainly for MW students in particular. So talking advice, I also spoke to Gabriele Gorelli, and he's the first Italian Master of Wine and one of the very newest MWs. So Gabriele passed in 2021, having not done any previous qualifications with the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, which is advised, to be honest. I mean, he's pretty.
How did he get around the
cool,
selection
isn't he?
criteria?
I know.
Well, trying to do that without doing. Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, Gabriele is a brand builder and designer by trade, and my first question was to ask his top tips for passing the MW exam.
Okay, being second language as I am, I think you need to scroll from yourself the Mediterranean attitudes and to be very concise and to be very precise and schematic in what you do. Especially as like me, I didn't make any WSET education before the program. So it was just, a foolish act to start with the MW, right? Without having anything but from a sommelier diploma. So you need to be very thoughtful on what you do and work in a very methodical way.
So, I mean, I know you do have a degree in foreign languages, but as you say, you speak French and English, but as you say, you are Italian. It's not your first language. I mean, that must have been particularly difficult with something like the Master of Wine exam.
Exactly. Yes, especially because it is not only a language thing; it's an attitude. It's an inner attitude that people have by themselves. So if you're Italian, you are educated to be a bit flowery in your expression. You're educated to be Mediterranean, in the broader sense. While if you're training for the Master of Wine, you have to be very disciplined, and you cannot waste words, and you cannot be ambiguous in your expression. So you must have your own vocabulary and use the words in a very thoughtful way. And also, as speaking about the practical, as a friend of mine said a few years ago, this is a theory exam with a practical component. So you must know your theory. And it's not just, talent. It's not about talent. It's about training. It's something that you build, and you have to build the theory, and then you build up with the practical on the theory. You cannot taste from the outset like not knowing anything. You might be the better taster in the room, the best taster in the room, but there's no point, because if you don't know theory, you will never go through.
That's such a good point. I think, sometimes people see blind tasting, as it were, as a bit of a kind of a party trick. But actually, when it comes to the MW, it's so different to that, isn't it? Obviously, there were challenges, but what were the high points, apart from passing, of course?
Well, the high points, I think you got so much from this program. You get so much because you need to be very disciplined in what you do. And at some point, you realize if you want to pass, you need to do that as it is your daytime job. So by the time you realize that, and I realized that the second year I sat the exam, it was late April, I realized, okay, I need to do this thing one day after another, as it was my daytime job. And you change your mindset. You totally are in another world. And this is especially beneficial when you come back to your actual job, and you import a lot of energy, method, which is the most important thing, and of course you have the ability to correctly dose your energies. And this was also because I started to have a specific diet, and to wake up very early in the morning. So these are pillars of my education, of my MW course and process that stayed in my life. Now I'm what I wanted to be, because now I am an MW, but I'm used to work as I prepared for the MW. So something that stays for you. It's not only those two beautiful letters after your name. It's something that you grab from the process and it's yours, and you make the difference. You have not only another gear, I would say two, the overdrive.
I think that's great. I mean, it's like being you're the elite athlete, aren't you, of the MWs? But just and finally, do you have any other advice for current students, or maybe people thinking they might embark on the MW?
Okay, of course, I would advise to take the WSET education before getting into this crazy NW program, but also you need to change yourself. I think the main message is to change yourself. You need to be unaware that it is impossible. For example, I give you this example. We were training for the dry notes, so we were training for the practical, and we were very long in our notes. So we realized you have only a few seconds to score a mark out of the 300 marks that you are allowed in the paper. And you have only a few words to do that. Then you realize you only literally write meaningful words and not the one that you don't need. So at some point you realize you can do that, but you do it in a totally different manner. And that's the switch, that's the click that people need to realize. For theory is the same. You need to think, you said globally, but not only. You need to be very precise in what you show to people, because you need to show that you have the global perspective, meaning how things actually work. And then you go into deeper details. But it's more about the communication of about what is the actual mechanism of the thing.
Concision, concise, clever communication. Gabriele, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, especially because my first bootcamp was with you and Peter.
Now, we have really fond memories of Gabriele, don't we, from one of the student tasting boot camps we ran.
One of our camps in Winchester.
Exactly. And just on that note, sorry, I've had an email, you won't see this, but I've had a lovely email from Matthew Hemming, MW. And he literally just emailed this morning to say, just heard you talking about your, he said he'd been listening to the podcast. He said, just heard you talking about your contacts from the listener connected with The Simpsons. Awesome, by the way, Matthew. I'm so with you on that.
Anybody who hasn't listened to that episode is not going to have a clue what you're talking about. But anyway, we talk about The Simpsons in most episodes, don't we?
This is just another example. And it reminded me, carries on Matthew, of something you said, I think, at your Winchester boot camp all those years ago. It was during the wrap-up pep talk, and you paraphrased Homer Simpson, telling us that the MW exam wasn't about the passing or even the taking part. It was about how drunk you got afterwards. Matthew says, I told Odney candidates that for about 6 years because he taught MW students.
So we should explain there's a camp in Odney, isn't there? There's a sort of like a boot camp kind of thing, but run by the IMW.
Wine educator doing that and leading that. And so anyway, Matthew, thank you for writing in. I'm not sure. I actually publicly disown that statement. I said I don't think I ever said that. So and that's I'm not sure I endorse those sentiments either.
You cannot disown anything to do with Homer Simpson. It's all your own fault.
Back to Gabriele.
Back to Gabriele.
I love the way Gabriele describes sort of starting the MW as a foolish act. Is it what a wonderful thing to say? And look at him now. Look at him now.
I know.
Quite a feat.
Not so foolish any longer.
Exactly. Quite a feat to do it in a second language, though. I mean,
Completely.
wow. Especially given what he says about the fact it's not just about the language, but about the kind of different attitude I think
of English
was the phrase that he used, wasn't it?
That was a really interesting point he made. I mean, it's not just about getting those two beautiful letters, as he puts it, after his name. But one of the main benefits of changing his mentality to do the MW exam was how it changed kind of the whole way he does business, and even how he Sounds like it, even how he leads his life.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And that actually, talking about it, is something that came out of my chat with Sumita or Sumi Sarma, who's currently studying to take the big stage 2 exams, which this year is scheduled to start on, I think it's 31st of October. August. Sorry,
they
to
got
early
postponed,
September.
didn't they?
Yeah, after they were postponed from June due to COVID. They usually happen in June, don't they? And lockdown. So Sumi's worked in the wine world for about the last 8 years across a number of roles, from production to service to marketing and wine communication. She's based in the UK with a family background in India. And I think it's fair to say has had a steep learning curve, having been originally in the banking industry and also, get this, a teetotaler for much of her life.
That's extraordinary.
She has
isn't it?
faced quite a few challenges in embarking on and pursuing her MW studies, but she also has some positive things to say too. My first question to Sumi was how the studies are going.
I don't think any student will say it's going great. I think that the studies are constructed in a way that you will always want to do more, and that is what I have found. That if you want, you can take a topic and you can just go deep down and just do everything. If it's about malolactic bacteria, you just go all the way down. But it's about kind of knowing when to stop and then when to kind of set your when to start looking laterally across all the aspects, and kind of, I think for me, it is knitting through all of them. I think it's like a handcraft. I just relate the studies, and I know I'm trying to best. I'm quite a textured person. I think that's the kind of analogy that I can use.
It's a lovely analogy. So you're just following on from that. I mean, what do you find the most challenging aspect of studying for the Master of Wine?
Interesting question. I think what I found challenging has kind of changed during the stages, and I have realized it's a dynamism in the studies. You keep evolving as a student, and that has been challenging, but also rewarding in a funny way, because you feel as if, oh my God, I can't do it, and then slowly it kind of builds in you, and then you feel, okay, I'm there, but I don't know this, and I kind of don't know how to link this to this. So it's the dynamism which is challenging, and more so, I used to think I am good at a subject, we have 5 theory papers, but I have come to realize that at this point of time, it is, we were just talking informally, it's linking across all those subjects, trying to bring out all the macro aspects across all of them. I think needs a brain that's wired. I wish I were like 20 years younger.
Oh, I think we all do, Sumi. What about the tasting? How are you getting on with the tasting?
I'll be the first person to say just to give me a background, I have I've not done wines given my background. I only started tasting wines about 12 to 15 years ago. I was a teetotaler until then.
Oh, wow.
So wine has been a new field, but yes, as I jumped into it, it was literally like jumping into the sea. And so I've kind of gone into the deep end. Sweet wines were never my favorite. Fortified wines only because I find them too sweet. and I'm an Asian. I like a lot of spice. On the challenge side of tastings, I have really been working on my paper 3, which is on the sweets and fortified wines. Yeah, it's a tough one for me.
What about the sort of more personal? They're all, the MW is all-encompassing studies. There's obviously a personal aspect to it as well. How do you find the sort of personal / financial / time side of things?
All of them. All of them are quite difficult. Personal side, definitely this particular situation that we are in, we've been through a pandemic now running over 16 months, has been very stressful. I'm a mother of 2 grown-up children, and I've had 2 consecutive years, one with A-levels and now the second one with GCSEs. Needless to say, both of them have had extremely difficult times. And I think, and I've had to spend a lot of time with my second one. My first one obviously came out at the start, but my second one was in the GCSE, and I have a special needs son. He's on the autism spectrum. So I've had to spend a lot of time homeschooling him during the lockdown because he wasn't able to really assimilate from the e-learning scheme as much as he could do from face to face. So there's a personal life that was impacted, and then professional life, which was undergoing a change because everything I had to do online. I had to change all of my things into kind of videos, which also was a learning lesson for me. And then the academic side, which was also having to undergo a lot of adaptation as well. And you know how the Institute has worked, miraculously through all this. I'm sure it's been difficult for them as well. So I've kind of told myself that I can do what I can do the best. And if I can't, I'm just going to, there's no point getting stressed out about things. But I do want to make an effort and try, because if I don't try, then I won't know where I stand. And that's why I'm keen to take the exam. Hopefully I don't get COVID. It would be a complete slap on the face if I do. So I've told my entire family, mid of August, I'm not seeing any one of you. Don't come near me. Don't kiss me. Don't do anything. You can do whatever you want. I'm isolating myself.
Don't come near me in August. I love that. But I think that's a wonderful positive outlook, Sumi. And I absolutely think you're doing the right thing. Goodness, the best any of us can do is just do our best, hope good things happen. Otherwise, it's very difficult at the moment, isn't it? So, moving on, what about positive experiences? What have been your most positive, uplifting experiences of doing the Master of Wine studies?
Lots of positive experiences, actually. First of all, connectivity, which I have gained. I don't think I would have been able to. I don't think I am that sort of person who goes out to connect with a producer in New Zealand who is kind of living out there. I would not have. It's just not me in my characters. It's really pushed me and made me think out of my box. It's completely stretched my personality as an individual. And also it has made me quite confident, even though I'm no way close to being a Master of Wine. It's about being adaptive and being open to learning, but also accepting the fact that you will not know everything, but you should know most of the things, and nothing should come as a surprise. It should come as an, oh, that makes sense. So it's an additional learning rather than, oh, I didn't know about that. I mean, that is what I would like to see myself once I finish. And I feel that there is a lot of development on that aspect that I have gained. So yes, connectivity is one, but also stimulation of the brain. I also believe that this particular course is meant for a certain profile of people. And you should be very, very open to failing, to learning. And if you feel that you are not able to cope with it, then I think first you take it slower. You take the steps slowly. It's not something that you need to do it in 3 years. You can. I think it's about more than the knowledge content. It is about how you build up that ability to be resilient and to accept defeat, but also move on with grit. That is the learning that I'm taking away.
That's really interesting to hear. Now, you've touched on your background a little bit and your context. What does the wine trade and to some extent the Institute of Masters of Wine need to do to improve on diversity and inclusivity?
This is a very passionate topic for me, Peter, actually. I think steps have to be taken very slowly. We are just at a stage where we are getting aware of it. And there's no fault, maybe because the industry was just constructed in that way that there was no need to do so earlier, but now there is a need. And I think that awareness is pretty much the first stage and the most difficult stage. From awareness will come acceptance. And I'm not sure whether we have kind of moved on to that stage. We're kind of somewhere on the first stage of awareness, then there is acceptance, and then there is the action. So it's a whole lot of steps, and you cannot expect everything to happen within a month or 2 months or 3 months. It's going to be slow. It is going to be cross generations. It is going to evolve cross sex, cross genders, cross countries. And there will be some places where things may not work, and we need to be open about that. And obviously I'm in the middle of it. But yes, I think it is something that will take time. And, when you're talking about male, female, we are still at a stage where there are not even as many females in the wine trade. We're still fighting about that, Then moving on to this is another huge piece, which will need, and then there is a lot more to it, racism and countries and sex and special needs. I think these are all, and I have a special needs son as well. So I'm hoping that in the next 10 years, things will be a lot more better. I'm not going to look at it day by day because it's quite frustrating because you don't see the results immediately. But I think we need to keep moving. I think the wheels need to move in a positive direction, and there have to be people who have to keep pushing on, and I'm very happy to be one of those people. But I think it'll take effect. It'll take effect slowly, and I'm quite practical about it because this is a fundamental change that we're making in terms of philosophy and thinking that will take some time.
You've been very vocal and high profile in calling for change, and you worked in different industries and different sectors. You've been in banking and finance as well as wine. Do you think that, two questions, do you think wine is a lot worse than the other sectors you've seen? And also, what are these steps that need to happen? You talk about things happening slowly, but steps need to happen. What are they? I'm
not saying wine is worse. Wine has been much slower. And it came as a bit of a shock for me because I thought that when I was in banking, what was happening in banking 20 years ago is what's happening now. We need an authority, but we also need backup with regulatory, legal, paralegal, HR institutions and also the mission statement. Every organization should have a mission statement which forcefully incorporates this. I think if things are not happening when you're speaking sweetly, it has to be forced upon. And sometimes it works, actually, if you make it compulsory. People will start thinking in those lines a lot more consciously. I think the point is not to just throw it upon people, but to make a conscious change. And yeah, it has to be done together. And you talk about authority. Does the Institute of Masters of Wine have a role to play in making those changes happen? Yes, absolutely. The course, the Master of Wine course, is very British origin, right? It's of a British origin, and it molds itself to people who have studied in this particular field or in this style of education. Now, I have come from India, and to be very honest, the Indian education is an offshoot of the British education because we were ruled by the British. But the way of writing answers, the way of thinking is very different, which is why I said that if you feel that you cannot, I think everybody can do the course, but everybody will have to do it at a pace that suits their background. Definitely, I do agree that the thinking process needs to be what it has to be, because I do not want to go back to my style of thinking. I think the way the journey has brought me on into the style of thinking is a lot more mature. It's a lot more neutral without showing favoritism, but it's also open to a lot more positive learning. Are there other ways of gaining that for students from different background who have not been able to avail of this type of learning? I think that is important for the Institute to consider. Again, it'll take time to develop that, but you'll need people outside the British framework to kind of sit together and make that change. And there are a lot of Masters of Wines who are doing that, and I think that's great. It should not become a qualification for elitism. I think it should be made as a qualification for gaining respect, but not to be made an elite. Because I don't know whether it's what the image has been developed. If that is the image, it's wrong. I think I've seen some of the best human beings in the wine industry in the form of Masters of Wine. So it's about gaining a title to be respected rather than to make yourself feel as if you're exclusive and you don't belong to the rest of the world. No, I'm not in that. I'm not in for that. Sumi Sarma, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks a lot. My pleasure.
So we all need to steer clear of MW students in August. Yeah. We would not want to wreck Years of preparation would be now.
Can we put cling film around them and us? And
let's just stay on our break.
Let's just keep our distance. Taking 2 miles, 5 miles, something like that. Use the phone.
We're on a staycation.
Anyway, I think it was really interesting the way Sumi said doing the MW program has stretched her personality.
Yeah.
I think was the phrase she used, wasn't it? It's kind of helped her become more confident. I mean, she has properly embraced change in her life and career, hasn't she?
She really has.
From being a teetotaler and a banker to a Master of Wine student. I mean, that's what I call a growth mindset in my world.
I know. And actually, she's also very involved in the drive to promote diversity and inclusivity in wine, which, which, as she said, still has so far to go to move beyond the initial stages of awareness to acceptance and then towards proactive change, which, to be fair, the IMW and Masters of Wine in general, they need to be involved with.
And they are.
And they are, but more so and more so,
but it was good to have that centre perspective, I think. Yeah. And also how she touched on how the MW exam is kind of representative of a very British mentality, which I think Gabriele mentioned too. Yes, as well.
Or touched on that.
It's not a bad thing in itself. I think a point both of them made, but I think it could be made more accessible, especially in the early stages, to people, not from that background or with those very specific skills.
Yeah.
And perhaps a committee of people not from that background would be the ones to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And these and other points were also what I addressed with Magnavai or Mags Janjo. Apparently, it's only his mother who calls him Magnavai, and when she's angry with him.
When he's been naughty.
When he's been a naughty boy. Wow. Anyway, Mags, as we will call him, because we're not cross with him at all. No. Mags is sales director for MJ Wine Cellars, and he's also a wine educator for the WSET. He recently set up the BAME, or BAME Wine Professionals Initiative, with Jancis Robinson, and that's to shine a spotlight on wine talent in the Black, Asian and minority, can't speak now, got tongue-tied, minority ethnic communities. Mags has just won the inaugural Golden Vines MW Scholarship, which is pretty amazing. It's for BAME or BIPOC students to fund the MW programme course and exam costs. So it's worth around £12,500, I think. So anyway, he's preparing to embark on the course later this year, and I asked him what winning the scholarship meant to him.
And it's really an amazing opportunity. I mean, I've been in the wine trade for about 15 years or so, and there's, we did a research a couple of years ago about kind of the cost of wine education. And more often than not, people who are going into wine education are taking it on as a second career. So after having gone through university with student loans and so on, you then got to, pay whatever this is. And actually the number was about between 10 and 15,000 pounds. That's how much it costs from complete wine novice to achieving the WSET diploma. But that's a lot of money to invest. And so we were kind of thinking about how do we improve diversity and so on. One of the major barriers was the financial cost of actually, being able to finance it. So there was this kind of notion of that there's no interest in it, and that, people of other ethnic backgrounds don't have an interest in wine, and that we proved that to be false because, with other kind of educational schemes that we put together were always oversubscribed. So that told us that there's definitely an interest for it, just that one of the kind of obstacles to get over it was kind of the financial challenge for it. And so enter the Golden Vines, which, kind of says, hey, we'll look for, the best and brightest, and we'll kind of sponsor you and give you, take away that financial burden and allow you to go and express yourself and allow you to really tackle this head on. So it's a massive kind of, weight off the shoulders approaching the MW program, knowing that, okay, I don't have to worry about the finances, but with that comes the extra pressure of having had this thing, have had the Golden Vines back you and pick you, then goes right, you kind of have to deliver. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, which I'm really, really, enthusiastic for. I'm looking forward to it.
Are you? I mean, as a prospective student, how do you feel about the amount of work that's going to be involved?
Yeah, so you might know, Susie, I took on the MW about 2 years ago. And to be honest, I mean, now in hindsight, this is 2020, it was a little bit too much too soon, in that I did 2, 3, 4 WSET all in the space of 3 years. So I did, from nothing to having a diploma in 3 years. And immediately after my diploma, I was talking about, I received my results in July, August, and by September, I was in the MW program. However, from a theoretical point of view, I'm a huge wine nerd. I really have that kind of appetite for consuming knowledge. And so theoretically, I could do most of what it asked me to do. The challenge, which you probably know, was the tasting side, was there is just no replacement for that. And so the Institute's feedback to me was, listen, take a year off, take 2 years off, go and taste some more, gain some industry experience and come back. And I think, looking at it now, at that time, it was a real kind of kick to the gut because I really wanted it and I really wanted to go for it. But obviously 2 years on, you think, actually, I definitely needed it, to unplug from that study, I think about 4 years, 5 years at that point. To unplug for it and to really engage with wine and try to understand it without the pressures of an exam. And now going into it, I feel like a significantly more rounded student. So fingers crossed, I'm looking forward to it.
So just to detail it, what do you get with the Golden Vine Scholarship? I mean, you obviously get your course fees paid. Do you get more than that?
Yes, there is indeed. So there is the Golden Vine Scholarship is kind of a holistic scholarship. I mean, it is, it's kind of one of its kind. I don't think anyone's ever done anything like it before. It really looks at everything that a student will need to be able to pass, be it an MS or be it an MW program. So it comes with study opportunities, it comes with travel opportunities. There are several sponsors of the Golden Vines Scholarship. For example, the Taylor Porthouse, we've got some Bordeaux Negociants. So there's an opportunity to travel, which, it makes a huge part of what the wine trade is and the study part of it. Because it's one thing reading about winemaking from a textbook. It's another thing, chatting with a winemaker in a winery and talking about why do you do X over Y and so on. So it does kind of cover everything from, the course fees. It links you up with mentors and links you up with people who have kind of been there, done that, who face similar challenges to you. And hopefully, as a student, one can draw from that experience. So it really is kind of a really 360 view of the MW or MS program, as it might be.
So, Mags, you've been quite a prominent figure in the drive for inclusivity and diversity in wine. You set up BAME with Jancis Robinson MW, which helps the BAME wine community have more visibility, presumably more access to employment. What do you feel the wine trade, and particularly the IMW, given that's what we're talking about right now, need to do to improve in that regard?
I think we have, in the last 12 months, everyone who's in the wine industry will know that, the industry has really picked up this diversity baton and ran with it. I think it's long overdue. I mean, like I mentioned, I've been in the trade for well over 10 years. And I remember the early days of the trade, walking to a trade tasting and being the only person of color. And it had this kind of aura of intimidation. I personally, from my experience, felt kind of out of place. And it really was at get in and taste what I wanted to taste and get out of there as quickly as possible. Because it just, with the greatest of respect, wasn't a welcoming space. And I think that's the kind of starting point. We must understand. One of the examples which I gave to one of my mentors was, I was born in Cameroon, West Africa, on the coast of West Africa. And it's a small kind of fishing town. Right, and I explained it to him by saying, imagine if you were kind of uprooted from the UK or whatever that might be, and placed into this, this completely new. How would you want the people around there to act? How would you want them to behave? How would you want them to kind of accept you? So we really, as an industry, have to go above and beyond. Really have to think, right, in terms of, if we want to drive diversity, we must first of all understand what diversity is. For example, is it hiring more, making sure the gender equality is more balanced in the industry? Is it making sure that we get an adequate representation of what our cities look like? For example, I've been to tastings in Manchester, in London, which are hugely cosmopolitan cities, right? And you walk into a wine tasting and it's like you've stepped in a completely different kind of time shift. So our industry doesn't kind of look like the world we live in. And so that's the kind of starting point of understanding, right, what does diversity mean? And how can we make sure that, we are breaking some of those barriers? And some of the last point I'll make on that is we have some long-standing notions in our minds which are completely false. For example, when we were setting up BAME Wine Professionals, the idea was, a lot of companies in the early days had resistance of, we don't really get, interest from people from a diverse background. And one of the questions which we asked was, well, how do you advertise your jobs? And it turns out, the jobs were being advertised, or the opportunities were being advertised through the same channels over and over and over again. And so if you advertise through the same channels, you're going to keep attracting the same kind of students. So from an IMW point of view, I know that one of the huge pools for students is the WSET, diploma grad. It kind of makes sense that you go through WSET, you graduate a diploma, and you go you might attempt the IMW. So the IMW now has to think, right, how else can we reach a wider audience? What else can we do to make sure that we're getting the best and brightest from different backgrounds? And I think that's a challenge that they face.
I totally agree. Totally. Mags, just as a final point, I mean, what are your own longer term aims? What are we going to see Mags Janjo doing in the future?
Well, the IMW winning the Golden Vine scholarships, amazing. It's just like, but I liken it to, when you've been accepted to run the London marathons, like, great. You've got the acceptance, now you actually have to go and do it. So I think for the next kind of 2 to 4 years, it's kind of knuckle down, head in book, and read. So it will mean so much to actually finally surmount. Because Susie, as most students have gone through that experience, not getting to the MW the first time round was the first time in my life I'd ever failed an exam. So it was really kind of gut check. And almost kind of really challenged me further to go, actually, I want to really, approach this thing. And from a commercial point of view, it's growing MJ wine cellars and continuing to sell amazing wines for independents and supermarkets.
So it's going to be a combination, really, and surely the MW in itself would help with that as well. I guess owning a company and being an MW would probably help a lot in that regard.
It does, but the other thing I will mention about the IMW, whether you pass or not, of course we want to pass, but as you know better than anyone else, it kind of exposes you to this kind of rich background of contacts. You meet so many people and you share pain together and you're bonded by blood kind of thing. So yes, even before getting through the program, I've met some amazing people who I know I can still pick up the phone and ask questions and say, I'm stuck in this kind of project. What are your thoughts? Have you done this before? So I would say more than anything else, the contacts you build the contacts I've built over the last couple of years have been absolutely amazing.
Mags Janjo, thank you so much.
Thank you, Susie.
Just to add, you can find the IMW's diversity policy on its website. And the website for Mags and Jancis' initiative is bamewineprofessionals.co.uk. And I'm sure you'll all join me in wishing Mags the best of luck as he embarks on his MW studies.
I think he's going to do really well.
I think he'll do really well. But let's not put pressure on him.
No, but he's
careful.
He's a good guy, and
yeah,
I think he's going to work.
Nice.
As he said, he's a wine geek. He's going to work really hard.
He's a wine nerd, aren't we all? Embracing the inner nerd is something we like to do on this podcast, isn't it? And many other things.
Embrace whatever. We'll just embrace everything.
Feeding the nerd.
We can almost embrace everything now, can't we? Almost.
Nearly, not quite. This is definitely some embracing you can do, whatever the state of lockdown. Someone who has some pretty sound advice on what to do in the studies is Jacky Blisson. Now, Jacky became an MW in September 2020 after 20 years in the wine industry. She's a native Montrealer who lived and worked in France for 12 years and then convinced her French winemaker husband, I think we should all have one of those.
I'd love one. I'm sorry, shouldn't have said that.
Enthusiastic.
I've got a frog in my throat now.
I might have to have a quick break, and I'll talk to you during this interview about that. She has decided to go back to Montreal with her, so they went back to Montreal, and I asked Jacky for her top tips on passing the MW.
Unfortunately, there's no miracle here. It's just consistent hard work.
Oh, I was after a shortcut, to be honest, Jacky.
I know. I think everybody is, unfortunately, but just consistent hard work.
No more than that.
Yeah, you know what I found really useful was to vary studying techniques. So not always to be reading notes, but I recorded myself saying my notes so that when I was cooking supper or walking my dog in the park, I could be listening to it. I watched videos, so you're learning in different manners. Study group, having a good study group, hugely important for me because it is a huge amount of work. So if you can cut that into, more manageable chunks and share it out, but you have to make sure your study group are, good quality and have a varied background. So you're really covering all your bases. That was also Very important. And getting advice, not being afraid. I have some students that have reached out a lot to me since I've passed, and then others who really haven't very much. And I found that it was, getting as much advice, as many MWs who will accept to receive your phone calls and emails, just hit them up for information.
Very, very useful advice. Thank you. So what were the biggest challenges that you had to overcome?
I think my initial challenge was really myself. When I first started studying, my very first studies in wine were in Burgundy. I moved to Beaune and studied international wine commerce. And I was one of the only foreigners in the group. And all the French kids were saying, oh, mais qu'est-ce qu'elle fait là, la petite Canadienne? Why is there a Canadian in this group? What would she possibly know about wine? So I think I went into the wine world with a bit of an inferiority complex. And when I got to Rust's, which is the first seminar in first year of MW, I thought, oh goodness, here I am. There was a meilleur sommelier d'Europe in the group. There were buyers for major wine chains from lots of different countries. So just getting confidence, really trusting yourself, trusting your palate, going with your first instinct. It took me a while to build that up, I think.
That's really, really interesting. Susie had a similar experience in Rust, and I think that
oh yeah,
getting the confidence, getting the sense of I belong here, this is what I can do, and I can start to sound as authoritative as these other people is half the battle for some people, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's one of the tricks, is sounding authoritative, even when you're not quite sure. The master of wine, you need to sound masterful, don't you?
Being plausible, the great secret in life, I think. And what about your greatest high points? We're passing is one thing, but were there really good things that you found doing the program or after the program?
Oh, well, one of the great things for me was winning. There's all sorts of great competitions you can enter throughout the program. And I entered one, which was a trip to visit all of AXA Millésime's properties in Bordeaux and in Porto. So we were staying at Château Pichon-Baron, which was just amazing. Visiting Petit Village in Pomerol, Sudereau, doing a vertical 20 vintages back of Sudereau, and then flying over to Noval in the Douro. That was a huge highlight. And I was with some other students who were amazing on that trip. At one of the other seminars in Odney in the UK, which is a great place for a seminar. I thought, really no distractions, real boot camp. They had an evening of debate at the end, which I thought was loads of fun, especially because we won and we got amazing prizes, beautiful bottles of vintage Bordeaux and port and champagnes. That was lots of fun too.
Savoring those moments when you can relax and you can sort of
absolutely, and just because that's when you're really making the connections. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but one of the best things about the program for sure is the people you meet along the way. And in those sort of residential, those seminar weeks and on those trips, that's when you really have the time to get to know other MW students, other MWs, and really make great friendships.
And just to take you back to your scholarship point, what would you say to people maybe thinking about doing one or actually more generally, people thinking about entering these sort of competitions?
Enter them all. Every single one, even if you think you have no chance to win, you never know. And also, I mean, it's just helping you study, right? Because for the most part, in order to win those competitions, you have to write essays. So you're practicing your essay writing technique. You're researching a topic that might come up on an exam. So it's a win-win, and you potentially might win a really cool trip. So don't see a downside.
How would you, this is a difficult one, how would you describe the whole experience, the whole studying for the Master of Wine experience to someone who has, zero interest in wine exams?
Intense. It's sort of all encompassing. It becomes your life for the period that you're studying. At times exhilarating, at times incredibly defeating and demoralizing. It's a bit of a roller coaster, really, from beginning to end, but you just learn so much. And I think it was one of the MWs, Matthew Hemming, that said at one of the seminars, I knew I was ready to pass the tasting exam when I started to enjoy it. And I thought, well, that's a load of rubbish. How are you ever going to enjoy sitting an exam like this? But it did end up happening. And you have to remember that it is just wine. I know it's a lengthy process, an expensive process, but it is a product that we all love so much, or else we wouldn't be there. So getting the joy back, I guess, a huge range of emotions.
It's an interesting point though, because I think a lot of people would think, how on earth could you take wine this seriously? Isn't this just an absurd thing to do with wine, which is essentially just something fun that you drink?
I think all of my friends who are not in the wine industry thought that. I had many people say to me, "Oh, are you still doing that wine course?" Sort of 3 years later, thinking that maybe I wasn't really very good at it.
Or you just loved it so much you were just enjoying it.
Exactly. And they also just thought we were just sitting around drinking all day. Thought that was a brilliant choice for a career. It is too.
All right. So last question. Any other advice, for current students or people maybe thinking they might give the Master of Wine a go?
I think it's absolutely worth it, but you have to be ready. I think you really, really have to, first of all, take the prerequisites seriously, have sufficient number of, years professional and educational experience in the wine trade, and get some advice. Talk to different people that have either tried or passed the program, and really, really say to yourself that you're a point in your life that you can dedicate that much time to study. There are brilliant people out there like you and Susie who will pass the first time, but there are many people that will take quite a while to get through. So you have to know that you're making a significant time commitment over a number of years. And so you've really got to go in with your eyes open.
Thank you. Lucky is the other word for some people like that. But Jacky, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's a good tip to just enter as many awards as you can. I mean, you never know what might happen or what you might win or how they might change your life, I mean, you won that Young Wine Writer Award, didn't you, right at the start of your career? And I think that really pretty much changed everything for you, didn't it?
Yeah, but what I really want to talk about is this French winemaker thing. I don't think we've properly kind of cleared the air yet, but...
Oh, well,
Yeah. Anyway.
Can't say more.
No. All right. Well,
I'll
go with your question.
It's still making...
This makes you not able to talk.
I can't actually speak.
Why have I not cracked this before? I can actually make you unable to speak, and then I can
rendered
just talk
speechless
the entire time. Okay, this is a new thing in our married career. Right. So the prize. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't really MW related, was it? But I genuinely didn't think I could make wine writing a career before then. So yeah, it changed everything actually. Gave me the confidence to try it, and here we are, 20 years and one MW down the line. I think a similar thing happened to you, didn't it? There was a champagne award.
That was a
WSET
award. I did a champagne thing that led to my first, it did lead to my first ever proper writing feature, which, really opened the door for me and I think it kind of made me believe I could make this my
sometimes
career.
It's just as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's something that Jacky touched on as well, isn't it? Having the confidence. Just to go for it.
Enough, just something that gives you a little bit of extra confidence to say, I can do this.
Yeah, it can go both ways, but we definitely, encourage everyone to enter as many awards as they can. So just one final point about Jacky. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing. Jacky's got 2 boys, 4 and 6. Apparently, she told me after we finished the interview.
Is this personal information?
It is personal information. Jacky, forgive me.
I hope you've asked her.
Speaking out of turn, but apparently they've been trying to get pregnant for ages, and Jacky had put off doing the MW for years because of the same reason. And then apparently finally her husband and her said, do you know what, just go for it, sign up. Her husband sort of pushed her to it. So she applied and she found out she was pregnant, and she found out she got into the MW program on the same day.
No. I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that.
It was amazing.
That is brilliant.
She said, look, come on, let's push the MW back. This is what's happening. This is more important. But her husband said...
So she said, let's stop. Let's not do it.
But her husband, this French winemaker, who we should all have a husband... By the way, this doesn't preclude me having a French winemaker.
No, you can have a French winemaker
can
husband.
We both have one?
Absolutely.
We
can share one if you like.
Well, no,
two for the price of one.
That would just be weird.
It'd all be fairly weird, wouldn't it? What, you think you having a French winemaker husband is not weird in the first place? Anyway,
we're focusing
moving
on Jacky here and Jacky's French winemaker husband. Don't shift the focus all the time. Honestly, you can't get the podcasting companions these days, can you? Anyway, her husband definitely encouraged her to sort of, obviously, he encouraged her first time to go on the program, and then when she said, "Let's push the MW studies back," he said, "No, this is a sign." And so he said, "You've got to carry on." So apparently she has memories of rocking her son in his crib while writing blind tasting notes.
Oh gosh, that takes me back. I seem to remember doing something very similar myself. Anyway, but children or no children, it's really good to hear. I think, isn't it, that you can make these things work somehow and succeed like Jacky has when life throws unexpected things at you. You can still do it.
I think that's a nice point to end on, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, we will look forward to seeing you all back here very soon after our summer break, winter break if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. Please don't forget about us. Did that sound plaintive enough?
A little bit. Yeah, okay. A little bit pleading. We need the violins.
Yeah,
but
we
there
do.
Go.
Please keep those downloads or subscriptions switched on. You won't want to miss season 3. And yes, please do, as I said, vote for us in the People's Choice Podcast Awards if you can. It's at podcastawards.com and we are in the arts category.
Thanks to Mags Janjo, Sumi Sarma, Jacky Blisson, Gabriele Gorelli and Peter Marks. And of course, thanks to you for listening. Until next time, cheers.